Okay, so hello everybody. My name's David Mills and I'm a fabric data architect working for Frame Consulting. And just to say it's absolutely great to be with you here today. So I'm going to talk about by far the most exciting topic in IT, which is of course security. All right. So I know security can be a little bit of a drag, but I'm going to show you some. It's not going to be death by PowerPoint, so I will be showing some recorded demos on how to do some security aspects in Fabric, including some Fabric networking as well. So a little bit more info on who I actually work for. Just get my laser pen going. So I work for Frame Consulting, and we provide data and AI consulting solutions for various clients across the UK. So that's mainly in the Microsoft and Databricks arena. So at Frame, we provide services like data and solution architecture, data engineering, Power BI development, data governance advice, and also managed service as well. Note we are also a specialist Microsoft solution partner in data and AI, so we are also officially recognised by Microsoft. So a little bit more about my background. Okay, so I've been involved in data since the millennium bug, year 2000, which never really happened. And that's now 25 years in IT. So I actually started my career as an Oracle Forms developer, and then I worked my way up to be a senior Oracle DBA working for Eon UK. I then jumped ship to Microsoft SQL Server in 2012, and that's where I really started to get involved with data warehouse design and Microsoft SQL Server and ETL development using IBM Cognos Data Manager and also SSIS. 2019, that's when I really started to get involved with Microsoft Azure. So this is mainly the back-end products like Azure Data Factory, Azure SQL Database, SQL Managed Instance, and Azure Synapse Analytics. Along the way, I've also got plenty of Power BI experience. I would never pitch myself as a Power BI expert, but if you ask me to do some semantic modeling and some reporting, then I'd certainly know what to do. But just don't ask me to do any DAX, because DAX isn't really my thing, to be honest. So what we're doing now, I'm sort of architecting and delivering Microsoft Fabric solutions to, I say, various clients around the UK. Solutions that look very similar to this. Now, I'm sure you've probably heard all about the Fabric Medallion architecture. However, I'm not going to talk about that because that subject has been done to death. Okay, so instead, I'm going to talk about how would you secure a Fabric platform similar to this one. How can we ensure that our data is safe as it can possibly be? Well, it's not just one single security consideration, it's many. There are many different security layers to consider when you're trying to lock down a Fabric solution like this. And I'll show you what they are. So I'm going to show you a fantastic onion diagram. Okay, so as an architect, these are the kind of areas that I always think about in Fabric. So the first one's the physical layer. So this is actually the Microsoft data center itself, or data centers. How does Microsoft protect your data at source? And also, what about disaster recovery? And let's just hope it's a little bit better than Heathrow airports. So, and then you got a second one. So this is Entra ID authentication, formerly known as Azure Active Directory. So how does Microsoft ensure users are who they actually say they are? Then you got networking. So how does Fabric deal with data sources protected by firewalls and private endpoints? Then you got the admin portal, very, very important. How do you secure your Fabric admin configuration settings correctly? Then you've got the multi-layered security model. So how do you correctly set your Fabric workspace and item level permissions? Then you got workspace roles. How do you allocate privileged workspace roles to users or security groups? And a bit further down, we have row level security, column level security, and object level security. So once you're actually authenticated to get into Fabric, how do you allow your users to see what they're actually allowed to see? Then you've also got OneLake RBAC roles. So how can you restrict Lakehouse items separately from workspace roles? And finally, right down the bottom, at the lowest level, is encryption. So how does Microsoft deal with Fabric data encryption, stored at rest, and also during in-flight? So those are the main security areas that I look after. Now, some of you may be thinking, where's Microsoft Purview? Yes, Microsoft Purview is a very important security tool, but in my opinion, it's more sort of related to data governance. So if I included Purview in this presentation, the presentation will become too long, and I'll probably send you all to sleep as well, because Purview is not exactly the most exciting subject. So although I've excluded Purview from this presentation, I certainly haven't forgotten about it, and I certainly wouldn't forget about it for clients when it comes to data governance. Okay, so let's go to the first layer. Fabric is a SaaS service. So how does Microsoft secure your data within its data centers? So I think Microsoft will have two key security areas that Microsoft will cover. So the first one is extremely unlikely. So that's a case of someone breaking and entering into the data center to physically steal your data. All I'll say is good luck with that. It ain't going to happen. Your odds of getting past all the different security checkpoints in the Microsoft data center are effectively zero. And even if you do get your hands on the data and the disks, the data is encrypted anyway, so you've completely wasted your time. Something more likely is some kind of power outage, maybe a virus or a bad software deployment that can take down the data center. Or maybe something like a kind of natural disaster, like a fire or a flood. When I worked at Eon, I have actually seen a flooded server room. That was a very, very interesting week. So these kind of things can happen. So how does Microsoft deal with this? It uses something called zone redundancy and availability zones. So Azure availability zones are at least 3 physically separate groups of data centers within each Azure region. This means Fabric data and services are replicated between each data center. So in the case of a local zone failure, availability zones are designed so that if one zone is effective or breaks, Fabric services are supported by the remaining 2 zones. So a question I ask myself is, would you notice anything go wrong with Fabric on the event of a data center failure? I suspect you would. What I think would happen, I certainly think that Fabric would have a bit of a wobble. You'd certainly have some kind of latency issues if a whole data center goes down. But at the very least, I would hope that your Fabric services would still be available. You'd still be able to read and you'd still be able to write. So that's zone redundancy. What if something more serious happens? What would happen if you lost the whole region? Now, this is something a lot more serious. So, as an example, in the United States, West US is in an earthquake zone. So, if that zone, if that region completely went offline, you lost all your data centers in that region, you're going to be in a bit of trouble. So, you won't be able to access Fabric until Microsoft recover it. So, how can we mitigate? We use something called geo-redundancy replication. So your OneLake data will effectively be replicated from one region to another. So if the primary region goes down, Microsoft tell you it will take at least 1 hour to recover to your secondary geo region. One very important point here is in a DR scenario, Fabric will be read only. You'll still have access to your Power BI reports, and that's a good thing. So your end users will still be able to see some of the data, and your OneLake data is still available as well. So you can access this using something like Storage Explorer or some of the Fabric APIs to view that data in OneLake in your secondary region. Big problems are you won't have any access to your lakehouses, warehouses, pipelines, notebook codes, machine learning experiments. They'll be offline. You won't be able to access those at all. What you'd need to do, you would need to recreate your capacity, recreate your workspaces and your Fabric objects manually. And you can do this using custom Microsoft scripts and a combination of Azure DevOps. So the bottom line is it's very important to have some kind of DR strategy. I'm just going to grab a quick drink. Okay. So how do you set it up in Fabric? It's pretty simple. You go to the admin portal, you go to capacity settings, go to Fabric capacity, choose your capacity, then you go to disaster recovery, and then you have a little toggle there to switch it on. Importantly, DR is set at the capacity level and is not set by default. That sort of makes sense. So if you set it at the tenant level, you may have capacities that you don't want to actually replicate over. So if it's production capacity, yeah, you bring it over. A few things you need to know. To do this, you must be a capacity admin or higher. Once you flick that switch at the bottom, it will remain set for 30 days. So that means that Microsoft won't let you switch it back. Okay. And also, it will take up to 72 hours to replicate your OneLake data from one region to another. Also think governance. Are you okay to replicate your data out of the primary region if you're in a different country? Also think cost. There is a cost for geo-replication. It's not free. It's not a free service. But the bottom line is this: make sure that you have some kind of Fabric DR strategy in place. Okay, so moving on to the next layer, Entra ID. So this was formerly called Azure Active Directory, and Entra ID is Microsoft's identity provider, and it deals with user authentication. So in other words, it's saying, who are you, and are you telling me the truth about your credentials? So how does it work? Okay, so a user will attempt to log into Fabric via the browser, so like Edge, or an application like SSMS or Power BI Desktop. You will then immediately get directed to Entra ID. Entra ID will check your username and your password. If either of those are invalid, it's going to kick you out. If it's happy, they're valid, you'll then go to the web front end. So this is where the Fabric UI will start rendering. From there, you'll hit the metadata platform. So the metadata platform holds objects like your workspaces and Fabric artifacts, and this is where authorization occurs. So in other words, what am I allowed to see? What workspaces can I see? What Fabric artifacts can I see? Then you can start doing your querying or any of your ETL, and this is where the backend capacity sits. So this is the compute and storage layer. Note that the metadata platform and the backend are protected by VNets and private endpoints behind the scenes by Microsoft. So it's super secure. You are not going to get into those particular areas. However, another question, is a username and password enough? Nowadays, no, it isn't. We need more security layers like conditional access. Okay, so conditional access, what's this? Conditional access lets you create and define policies that react to sign-in events, and it requests additional actions before a user is granted access to Fabric. So when a user authenticates, access is determined based on a set of policies that might include IP address, location, or managed devices. So in this example here, so we can have a network location. Let's say I'm trying to log in from Russia or North Korea or out to Mongolia. Entra ID will say, sorry, I'm not happy with that network location. You're not coming in. Also, a more common one, device type. So are you logging in a non-company laptop? Entra ID will flag that. Sorry, no, you're not coming in. If the conditional access policies are okay, I'd always recommend having MFA set up as well. So in other words, send a message to your employee's phone just to double check, yes, I am who I am. Once you get past all that, you're into Fabric. Okay, so networking, one of my favorite topics. So a lot of people say networking is a dark art, and they are dead right. It is bloody complicated. So in the past, I've worked on some police systems, and this has some of the most hardcore Azure networking I've ever seen. So you try locking down a Synapse environment with private endpoints. It's not very easy, really, really difficult. But in Fabric, to be fair, I think it actually is a little bit easier. And there are three main concepts in Fabric networking, which I'm going to try my very best to demystify with some demos. So these are managed private endpoints, workspace identities, and Azure Private Link. Now, I will be doing some demos on private endpoints and workspace identities, but first I want to talk about Azure Private Link. Before we do that, I need some more water. Okay, so Azure Private Link. With Azure Private Link, you can only access Fabric privately using a private endpoint. And this is the big thing. Fabric is configured to not be accessible to the public internet. So if you go down this architecture road, you try and log in via Edge, you're not coming in. It's not going to let you because it's locked down to a private network. Instead, end users will have to connect to a private network to access Fabric, i.e. over a company VPN. Very importantly, this is a tenant level setting, which means all your traffic will now travel over the Microsoft backbone network. The question I always ask myself on this one and to clients is, do you really need to do this? Do you really need to do this and go down this level of locking down? The reason why I say that is because, in my opinion, I've just described conditional access and Entra ID with MFA, and that is very, very secure for inbound traffic. Also, the Fabric backend, I mentioned it earlier, that's also very secure as it's locked down with VNets and private endpoints behind the scenes by Microsoft. So if I was going to architect a solution like this in production, I would thoroughly test it very, very hard. I would want to ensure that all of our Fabric artifacts, all of our ETL, Power BI works as expected. As you can see on the right-hand side, there are a few gotchas. So you're no longer able to load resources locally. You've got increased express route bandwidth and added cost for your private links. And also you can't use the on-premise data gateway as well. So there are a few gotchas with using an architecture like this. At the frame, we have successfully locked down a tenant using Azure Private Link. We're still in the process of testing it. If I was going to put this in for a client, I would want to test this inside out just to make sure this works as expected. Okay. Okay, something not as hardcore. So this is Fabric outbound traffic. So this is to do with workspace identities. So a workspace identity allows a Fabric workspace access to a resource like ADLS Gen2 storage account that is protected by a firewall. So this is when a storage account has network access enabled from selected virtual networks and IP addresses. This means it's closed off from the public internet. So in Fabric, we can create a workspace identity on the right-hand side to authenticate to the storage account without us having to manage any credentials. And I'll show you how to do it in a demo. Okay, so this is a recorded demo. I certainly wasn't brave enough to do this on the fly when you're talking about networking and stuff in preview. So this is a recorded demo. All right, explain it best I can. So on the left-hand side, we have a storage account in Azure. On the right-hand side, we have a Fabric Lakehouse. So the goal is to access the storage account using a Fabric shortcut that authenticates to the storage account using a Fabric workspace identity. But first, I'll show you how not to securely authenticate. So let's go into the demo. Okay, so we have our resource group and we go into our storage account. So let's go on to containers. Let's see what's in there. Let's go into sales. And we can see we have a sales CSV file. Let's put my glasses on so I can see it. And if we look in the file, we can see we have some data in there. So let's go into our networking settings. So we can see here that this storage account is enabled from all networks, so that's not a good start. So let's create a shortcut to it. So a new shortcut, ADLS storage Gen2, and we need to create a new connection. We need to know where to connect to in Fabric. So let's put in the URL. So we need to find the endpoints for this storage account. So going to endpoints, then we're going to data lake storage. Add that in. So we need to edit the connection. So now we need to change that to account key. Remember, this is how not to do it, even though it will work. So now we go into access keys. We copy the key, and then we put it into the account key there. Okay, so question for the audience. Microsoft guys are not allowed to answer this. What is wrong with doing it this way? Someone tell me. That's one. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Any others? Yeah. Spot on. Yeah, correct. And I do see clients doing this, and I'll tell them, please stop it. So essentially what we're doing, we're getting the account key from the storage account, and we're moving it to another product. That itself is a security risk. You should never do that. Account key should always stay within the Azure storage account or within an Azure key vault. That's the only place they should go. Also, what would happen if our friendly Azure admin decided to rotate the key on the left-hand side? What would happen to the shortcut? Yep, it would break. So Azure admin should rotate the keys. That's why you shouldn't put account keys in there. So if that's in production, all your shortcuts are broken. That's going to break your ETL. You're going to be in all sorts of bother. So let's continue. So let's create the shortcut. You can see the sales folder. Click next. Okay, so now we can see our shortcut working as expected because it's gone to public. So let's go to networking. Okay, so let's lock it down a bit. So let's restrict it to specific IP addresses, put it behind a firewall, click save. Now let's see what happens to our shortcut. Refresh it. Has a bit of a wobble, has a white screen. Not good. Refresh it again. Oh dear, broken. You now have a broken shortcut. So our storage account is a little bit more secure, but we can't access our shortcut. So now we need to create a workspace identity. So if we go to workspace settings, workspace identity, create a workspace identity. So what this is doing, this is creating a service principal behind the scenes, and this is going to manage our credentials for us. We don't have to mess around with account keys or anything like that. So that's what the identity is called. So now we need to add a RBAC role. So we go to type in blob, principal of least privilege. So we want storage blob reader. Click on next. So now we need to find our identity so we can map it over. So there you go, DPM fabric medallion architecture. Click select, review and assign, click next again, review and assign. So now the workspace identity has the permissions to read that storage account. Click on X, so let's prove it. So let's create a new shortcut. ADLS Gen 2. We've already created the connection, so we just need to edit it. So now we need to change the authentication kind to workspace identity. We don't need to bring the keys across. Click update. Now we can see the sales folder. Click on next. I'm going to rename that because I want a new shortcut. Click on edit. So we're going to call this shortcut sales 2. Click the tick box. Click create. Now we can see our shortcuts. No red X's. So there's the data. So that's the new shortcut. And notice that it has fixed the original shortcut as well. So that's how you use workspace identities. Very good feature. They are still in preview at the moment, but I must admit I haven't found any bugs with it. So I have used these in production. They're looking good at the moment. So use them if you can. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so let's take it up a notch. So managed private endpoints are connections that access data sources that are completely blocked from the public internet. So in this diagram here, let me just get my laser pen back. There you go. So we have an Azure Event Hub that is in a VNet that is locked away in a VNet and protected by a private endpoint. We have a Fabric event stream that is trying to pull the data from that event hub that is protected by the private endpoint. So we need to create a managed private endpoint within Fabric to achieve this. You can also do this with an Azure SQL database as the source, and that's what I'm going to be doing in the next demo. Okay. Right, so on the left-hand side, I have an Azure SQL database in Azure. On the right-hand side, I have a Fabric Spark notebook that is trying to connect to this Azure SQL database. Now, before I get shot down in flames, can anybody spot the deliberate gaping security issue? Yeah. I would never, ever, ever do that in a production environment. I wouldn't do it in a test environment. I wouldn't do it in a dev environment either. However, if I'm doing it for a connection test like I'm doing now, or in a demo, I'm more than happy to do that. But don't ever do that in production. Use Azure Key Vault as well. Okay, so let's get going. Okay, so let's have a look at our SQL database in Azure. Well, first, I'm just highlighting the username and password error. You can see at the bottom there, we have connection denied since denied, public access set to yes, To connect to this server, use a private endpoint. So let's have a look at the settings of our SQL Server in Azure. So let's go to networking. You can see it's disabled, so nothing can access this SQL database. Let's go to private access. And we need to create a private endpoint in Azure. So we'll name our private endpoint. Click Next. You can see our target resource is SQL Server. So now I've already created a virtual network beforehand, so I've called that SQL VNet, and I've also created a subnet as well, specifically for the SQL Server to live in. So we now need to create a DNS record. So that's created automatically by Azure. Don't have to create that manually, so not worried about tags. So now we need to create the private endpoint. So click on Create. I have sped the video up here. It doesn't take milliseconds to create. It takes around about 4 or 5 minutes. So that's created all the networking components that we need. So the private endpoint is the access point into the virtual network. So let's go into the resource group. Let's have a look at the SQL Server. Let's go back to networking. Private access. Now we have a private endpoint. So now we have an entry point for that Fabric Workspace, sorry, Fabric Notebook to read. So now let's go to Fabric and Workspace settings. Now let's go to network security. We need to create a managed private endpoint to connect to that private link service. So I'm going to name this, I think it's FabSQL 3 I called it. So now we need the resource identifier. We need to know where to connect to. So we need to go to endpoints, I think, settings endpoint. Settings properties, sorry. And right at the bottom, you've got the resource ID. So this is where we need to connect to. And target subresource, Fabric works that out automatically. So now I need to send a request message. So I'm just going to put let me into the endpoint. Click create. And that's going to provision the managed private endpoint on the Fabric side. So let's go back to our SQL database. Let's see if that request has come through. Private access. There you can see the new request. So that's the request that's coming from Fabric. Please let me in. So if we click on that and click approve. So you can see here at the top, does that let me into the endpoint? So that's what I wrote in Fabric. So that proves that this connection is legit. So I'm just going to type approved. Click yes. Hit refresh and hopefully that'll say approved. Good, so now we're in a good place. So now we should be able to, from Fabric, should be able to talk to Azure. So that's going to provision, that's going to succeed. Again, that usually takes around about 5 minutes for the networking components to speak to each other. Click close. Let's go back to our Fabric notebook. So remember, this is broken, originally broken. So let's run the cell. Okay, so you can see right down at the bottom, I have a table called, well, I can't remember what the table's called, but it's got one column and it's got one row called let me in. So that proves that the connection works from Fabric to an Azure SQL database over a private endpoint. At the moment, I think you can only use this kind of tech with Fabric notebooks and Spark SQL definitions. I did try using a pipeline, but it failed. So with private endpoints between Fabric and Azure, I think it only works at the moment with Spark notebooks. So that's how you do your private endpoint kind of stuff. So congratulations, you're now all network engineers. I hope you sort of got your head around that. Networking does take a long time to get your head around. I mean, Dave, who I used to work with at Microsoft, we've both worked with police systems, haven't we, mate? And believe me, the private endpoint stuff is outrageously complicated. It can be. But I think Fabric does make it a little bit easier, in my opinion. Okay, all right, quick drinks break. Okay, Let me get my laser pointer back. Okay, so the admin portal. So this is where you configure your Fabric tenant capacity and workspace admin settings, and it is critically important for Fabric security. What you can see on the screen is an absolute classic: publish to web. People in your org can publish reports on the web. Published reports don't require authentication to view them. So any Joe Blogs can get a really sensitive report and just publish it to the web. You don't really want to be doing that. Two questions that I normally ask around admin portal settings. So the first one is, does this setting really need to be enabled? If it doesn't, then switch it off. However, if you're going to do that, make sure you do some testing so things don't break. If you do need to switch it on, then does it need to be enabled for the whole organization? If it doesn't, then use a specific security group. Don't assign it to individuals either. Don't assign to individuals. You're much better off using security groups. So those are the two questions that I normally ask about the admin portal. Digging a bit deeper. So some settings that I always keep an eye out for, or the architecture team at the frame do anyway. The guest setting allows broad external access, which can pose security risks. So this is for guest users. So guest users can access Microsoft Fabric enabled for the entire organization. Users can see guest users in a list of suggested people. So obviously guest users aren't part of your company, so you just need to be very careful with guest user settings. Another one that I really like, export and sharing settings. So allows users to export data sets, reports and visuals to Excel and other software, potentially exposing sensitive information outside of Fabric security controls. This one's my favorite, export to Excel. I dare you to switch that one off. Watch your company crumble to dust. Yeah, but joking aside, should you really be allowing end users to export potentially confidential data outside of Fabric security controls? So it's something you probably need to have a chat with your Fabric admins. Okay, so governance related settings. So this one in green is actually, this has been set correctly. So create workspaces, that's very, very a big kind of responsibility. So that's just enabled to a subset of the organization, and that should be a very small subset. So you don't want your end users creating workspaces. So this one here, this is sort of like medium. So this defines your workspace retention period. So in this case, it was set to 7 days, but you might want to increase that window to a maximum of 90 days. So for example, if one of your admins accidentally deletes a workspace, you've got a bit more time to get it back. So again, with the admin portal settings, nowadays there are so many settings in there, it takes at least 2 or 3 days to actually work out all the different admin settings and what should you set them to. Again, we're working at this with the frame to have some kind of framework to give a recommendation about your admin portal settings, because there's so many of them, you just need to work out what's the best practice for them. But some are very obvious that you just need to be careful of. Okay, so Fabric, it has a multi-layered security model. So it enforces multi-layer security through Entra ID. So that's something that I've already discussed around authentication. And also at the authorization level, you can set workspace and item level permissions. So certain users can access certain workspaces, or some users have no access to workspaces but specific item permissions. I'll talk about that in a bit. Users also get granular permissions at the data layer. So components like the lakehouse, the warehouse, and the semantic models. So this is where you can add OneLake RBAC roles in lakehouses, or something like row-level security on warehouses or Power BI. So there's different layers within Fabric, which is a multi-layered security model. Okay, so workspace roles, very important. So once you create a workspace, you can add users to the workspace either individually or via security groups. I always recommend not assigning workspace roles to individuals, because that is a maintenance nightmare. It's also bad practice. So it's better to assign it via security groups. So you have different roles. So you have the admin. So as an admin, you are God. You have God rights. You can delete workspaces, add admins, and you can write data, create items, and read data. You've also got the member role. I must admit, I don't really see the member role used that much, personally, with the clients I work with. The only thing that's different with the admin, you can't delete workspaces or add other admins. Contributor role, however, very, very common. So this one is mainly for your data engineers. So this is where you can write data, create items, or read data. And you've got another very common role here, so that's the viewer role. So that could be for some of your business users. You know, they only need to be able to read the data. But the key thing is make sure you have a good framework for your security groups instead of having a mishmash of roles assigned to individuals, otherwise you're going to get yourself in a mess. Okay, so we're moving down the layers now, so we're getting a bit more granular. So this is row level security, column level security, and object level security. So just because a user has access to a data set, it doesn't mean they should be able to access every single row or every single column of data. So in other words, you should only allow your users what they're actually allowed to see. So you can apply row level security. I mean, I've done it in Power BI Desktop. I think you can do it in the semantic model and tabular editor. Megan can correct me if I'm wrong there. And you can also do it on Fabric warehouses by creating security policies using SQL. Yeah, so row level security, column security, object level security. Think about what your users can access. Should they be accessing the whole data set? So for example, in the police, keep going back to the police for some reason today. So I applied row level security. So a constable could only see their crime data, whereas a sergeant could see his data plus the people that were under him. So that's a good example of row level security and how you set it. Okay, so OneLake RBAC. So OneLake RBAC uses role assignments to apply permissions to its members. So again, you can assign roles to individuals or to security groups, and each member in the user group gets the assigned role. As an example, I could grant a user viewer access to a workspace, but that would then give him access to every item in the workspace, and I might not want to do that. Instead, I can use OneLake RBAC to create custom roles within a lakehouse and then grant specific access to the lakehouse folders. And I'll show you how to do it now. We have a demo. Okay, so on the left-hand side, I have a Fabric lakehouse with me as the workspace admin. On the right-hand side, I have a brand new user that I want to give granular permissions to lakehouse tables. The goal is to do this using OneLake RBAC roles. Note this feature is in preview. Okay, so let's make a start. Okay, so that's me on the left, on the workspace admin. On the right, we have a user called Andy Dufresne. So let's have a look at Andy's permissions. He can see 2 workspaces, but he cannot see my workspace. He has absolutely no access to that at all. So what I could do, I could add Andy to that workspace as a viewer, but I'm not going to do that because I want to give Andy more granular access. So I won't be doing that. So instead, I can go into the lakehouse and manage permissions specifically for the lakehouse. So I'm going to add the user, so Andy Dufresne. Note this is a demo. I'd normally do this on a security group as opposed to a user. So that's what I'm doing it for Andy specifically. So I can add the SQL Analytics endpoint, Apache Spark, but again, I won't be doing that. So let's grant Andy access to our lakehouse. So let's go back to Andy, refresh his workspace, sorry, refresh Fabric. So we go to workspaces, he still can't see our workspace, which is what we want. We only want to give him granular access, remember. So now Andy can see the lakehouse, but not the workspace. So let's see what happens when he opens it. Red X is a death. So we need to give Andy some more permissions. So let's go back to me, go back to my workspace. Let's open the lakehouse. And you can see at the top there, you've got your preview feature, manage OneLake data access. So now I want to create a new RBAC role. So I'm going to call this gold reader. And let's go to selected folders. So I'm only going to allow Andy to see specific folders. So these are the dimensions and the fact table, plus 1 orders folder. He's not going to have access to the silver tables. So just bear that in mind. Okay, so I've granted him, yep, so now I'm assigning Andy to that gold reader role. He's been added. And you can see at the bottom, he's got read permissions and direct assignment by me. I'll click save. So now Andy is now a member of the gold reader role. So let's go back to Andy and refresh the tables. Excellent. So now he can only see the tables via that role. He can't see the silver tables, which is what we want. And he can only see the one orders folder, which is what we want. Let's look at the data. Yeah, data looks good. So what happens now when Andy looks at the data in the tables? Still can't see it. Unable to load the table view. So I just need to give Andy one more level of permissions. So that's select access on the tables. So if I go over to our analytics endpoint, SQL analytics endpoint, and let's just open the tables. So those are all the tables that I can see, which is as expected. Let's go into SQL queries. So I'm going to grant Andy select on the top two tables on the right hand side. So I'm just going to give him access to dim customer and dim date, but not the bottom two. So that's done. So let's go back to Andy. Fresh. Fact sales gold, he won't be able to see that because I haven't granted select. Same with product. But if we go to dim date gold, hey presto, you can see the data. Same with the dim customer. So dim customer, dim gold work. So that's an example of how OneLake RBAC roles work. One final thing, how does it look in the SQL Analytics endpoint for Andy? So open up DBO. So he can only see the two tables. So that's a good example of how OneLake RBAC works. Now this worked really seamlessly in the demo. I did mention before this is in preview, so at times this was a little bit flaky. Sometimes things didn't work as expected. So I'm hoping that Microsoft will iron out the bugs in that, but I'm hoping that I'll give you a good idea how to do granular permissions within Fabric. Okay, drinks break. Okay, so we're nearly there now, guys. I'll just get my laser pen again. Encryption. So we're right at the bottom level now. So in Fabric, every interaction within Fabric is encrypted by default. Data remains protected when it's stored at rest and also during transfer, which is in flight. So Fabric data at rest is encrypted and it uses Microsoft managed keys. It includes customer data as well as system data and metadata. So in other words, if you have some data that is just sitting there in OneLake that isn't being accessed, it is essentially encrypted. Also in transit, data in transit across the public internet between Microsoft services is encrypted with at least TLS2, so that's Transport Layer Services 1.2, and Fabric negotiates to the next level, which is TLS 1.3 whenever possible. So in other words, when data is moving from A to B, for example, in some of your ETL, that data will be encrypted, so you won't have any man-in-the-middle attacks. Okay, so wrapping up now. So key takeaways about Fabric: security, defense in depth. It's not just a case of switching on the switch and your whole environment is secure. There's many, many different things you need to think about. Multi-layered security is essential. So identity, network, and data security must work together. Always use the principle of least privilege. Only allow people access what they should have access to. And also zero trust. It's not just about your network perimeter, it's about individuals. Don't trust anyone. Also have a DR plan. Just going back to Heathrow Airport again. Their DR plan wasn't very good. I'm hoping that Microsoft's is a lot better. And also don't forget logging, monitoring and auditing. And also don't forget Purview as well. So I mentioned Purview right at the start. So that's the Microsoft's key data governance tool. Again, I'm not going to talk about it in this presentation, but always think about data governance and data cataloging with Microsoft Purview. So I'll finish on this. So remember, a security breach is one of the worst things that can happen to your data platform. Why? Number one, loss of data. Number two, company reputational damage. Number three, litigation and potentially getting sued. And number four, absolutely huge fines. You can get fined millions of pounds if you have security breaches. So the bottom line is try and think security if you can, even with a SaaS platform like Fabric.